You're listening to Puma Podcast.
You talked about the Indo-Pacific a little bit, and I'm glad that you mentioned it. Can you name the importance of at least one of the nations in the ASEAN, and what type of agreement we have with at least one of those nations? And how many nations are in ASEAN, by the way?
I couldn't tell you the exact amount of nations in that, but I know we have allies in South Korea and Japan and in AUKUS with Australia, trying to work on submarines with them.
None of those three countries that you've mentioned are in ASEAN. I suggest you do a little homework before you prepare for these types of negotiations.
That's United States Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth fielding questions at his confirmation hearing in the Senate. This exchange with Senator Tammy Duckworth alarmed American officials and international observers alike, who worried over his lack of knowledge about a region filled with key U.S. allies, including the Philippines. Hegseth is a U.S. military veteran and up until recently was a talk show host on Fox News, who encouraged President Trump to take extreme military actions that include bombing cultural sites in Iraq and sending in troops to suppress Black Lives Matter protests in 2020. His confirmation was hounded by allegations of alcoholism and sexual misconduct and came down to a 50-50 vote in the Senate. Appointments of polarizing figures like Hegseth, a flurry of extreme and confusing executive orders, and a growing number of feuds with other nations have marked Trump's first 2 weeks in office. They have also signaled a return to chaos that has America and the rest of the world scrambling to respond and to see what happens next. In this episode, a political scientist and a researcher of Southeast Asia weighs in on what it all means for the Philippines and its ties with its oldest treaty ally. I'm Bella Perez Rubio. You're listening to Teka Teka, powered by Puma Podcast. Critics have called Hegseth the most unqualified nominee for Defense Secretary in modern history. Compared to his predecessor, Lloyd Austin, who took up the post with decades of distinguished military and government service under his belt, Hegseth's credentials are very limited.
How concerned are you about appointees like Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, who couldn't name an ASEAN country during his appointee hearing?
A lot of Americans can't find other countries on the map, right? So
that's Aries Arugay, chairman of the Political Science Department at the University of the Philippines. He's also a researcher at ICES, a Singapore-based institute studying social, political, and economic trends in the region.
Even if he's the defense secretary?
yeah, that's the thing. I mean, he's a defense secretary, but hopefully the bureaucracy in the Pentagon will be able to guide him. And we can't really expect, a lot of Trump officials to really know what they're doing.
Former Defense Secretary Austin visited the Philippines 4 times as Defense Secretary. And in that time, American troops gained access to 4 additional Philippine bases under the Enhanced Defense Cooperation Agreement, bringing the total up to 9. Joint military drills known as balikatan or shoulder-to-shoulder exercises also increased in size and scope. Last 2024 saw the largest iteration of the annual exercises ever, with 17,000 troops in total participating. A missile system deployed by the US to the Philippines during Balikatan 2024 has since become the latest point of contention raised by China.
I don't understand the comments on the Typhoon missile system. We don't make any comments on their missile systems, and their missile systems are 1,000 times more powerful than what we have.
That's President Marcos Jr. speaking to reporters on January 30, 2025. He was responding to China's strong opposition to the missile system's presence in the Philippines.
So I don't understand. Let's make a deal with China. Stop claiming our territory. Stop harassing our fishermen and let them have a living. Stop ramming our boats. Stop water cannoning our people. Stop firing lasers at us. And stop your aggressive and coercive behavior. And I'll return the Typhoon missiles. Tigil nila yung ginagawa nila, babalik ko lahat yan.
China's increasingly aggressive actions in the West Philippine Sea have been met with firm resistance by the Philippines under President Marcos Jr. His administration has also reinvigorated ties with the U.S., relying on American aid, cooperation, and its ironclad commitment to our Mutual Defense Treaty. A U.S. Defense Secretary with little knowledge of the decades-old alliance would be a major cause for concern.
I think the most concerning for me is that it seems at the moment this first incarnation of the Trump cabinet, which I think will not be the last. But at present, we really see some hardcore appointees. At any case, I do think there's a lot of knowledge coming from, for example, Marco Rubio, State Secretary, some of the Republican leadership that might, help guide some of the more uninformed members.
Rubio was serving his third term in the Senate when he was appointed as Secretary of State. A career politician from the Republican Party, he was a member of the Foreign Relations and Intelligence Committees. In an opinion piece for The Washington Post, he identified China as America's most significant adversary. Here's what he said at his confirmation hearing.
Here's the one thing I would point to here with regards to stability. If the Chinese are in fact serious about stabilizing U.S.-China relations and finding avenues of which we can be cooperated and avoid conflict, then they will not do anything rash or irrational when it comes to Taiwan or the Philippines for that matter. The actions they are taking now are deeply destabilizing. They are forcing us to take counteractions because we have commitments to the Philippines and we have commitments to Taiwan that we intend to keep. And so if they want to at least create some pathway for stabilization of our relationship with them, even as we remain engaged in global competition and in some cases more adversarial than others, they really need to stop messing around with Taiwan and with the Philippines because it's forcing us to focus our attention in ways we prefer not to have to.
But of course, we cannot downplay the threat that Trump's actions might have on the alliance itself.
Aries says that the U.S. under Trump 2.0 seems to be retreating from the alliance system that former President Joe Biden sought to strengthen. After his re-election, Trump wasted no time, picking feuds with the leaders of Mexico and Colombia, and even threatening to annex Greenland, the Panama Canal, and Canada.
This is something domestic, and as far as countries like us go, we can only be spectators to what is happening to America internally. But at the end, I think the U.S. needs to think that while it focuses itself more domestically, this will really have repercussions on its overall reputation. So if we want to press China on being a responsible superpower, that its reputation is important, the same goes with the United States. And the problem is, if the U.S. keeps doing this, then reputation is something that it's so difficult to repair, and it's so difficult to overcome.
In other words, the U.S. threatening to annex territories is a concerning message to send to countries like the Philippines, who rely on America precisely to check China and the threat it poses to neighboring countries. More from Aries on Trump's first days in office after a quick break. In addition to starting trade wars with Mexico and Canada, both neighbors and allies to the U.S., Trump's government has withdrawn from international organizations, key treaties, and other commitments.
The departure from WHO, the World Health Organization, the Paris Climate Accords, and increasingly the retreat from any of the foreign funding initiatives and projects, that's concerning.
One of Trump's first acts was to order a 90-day freeze on tens of billions of dollars in foreign aid, with very few exceptions, mostly military assistance to Israel. State Secretary Rubio later clarified that, quote, core life-saving programs, unquote, would also be spared, but countries and humanitarian groups are scrambling to figure out if and how they will be affected.
The US has frozen aid. Hindi pa maliwanag kasi eh. Hindi pa maliwanag. It's hard to comment because on the freezing of the aid, it's even the agencies in the US government, hindi nila naintindihan what it means. Ano yung tatamaan, saan yung babawasan ang aid fund. So,
dozens of United States Agency for International Development employees have already been laid off. In the Philippines, several humanitarian groups working to combat the HIV epidemic confirmed that they would be affected by the aid freeze as well.
And it seems like the marching orders are twofold. One is to really prioritize America and to clamp and limit certain things that America was doing before that Trump himself promised that will end. The second one has something to do with the idea that it seems like Trump 2.0 is seeking to strike a deal with countries like China and Russia. No? But for the Philippine interest, more on China, and there's no hesitation to withdraw from previous commitments being made to certain allies, including the Philippines.
So far, Aries says Trump seems uninterested in American global leadership.
For me, the biggest paradigm shift, I think, of the Trump 2.0 is that before, America's interest is always tied with the global interest. So when what we say is what is good for America is good for the world and vice versa. Trump 2.0 seems to directly challenge that and say, no, what is good for America is not good for the world, and what is good for the world is not necessarily good for America. America has done this. It has this isolationist mode in its history before, but Trump has really pushed the envelope, and if it abandons its leadership position on many respects out of considerations that, oh, America doesn't have to pay up, it doesn't need to subsidize everything, and at the moment it seems like it's really counting change. The fear is that if America does this under Trump, this leadership vacuum might be filled by other countries, particularly China, who the U.S. considers to be its peer competitor. But at the moment, the competitiveness rivalry side is not something that Trump seems to emphasize, because it wants to approach China first. If it can cut a deal, let's see if we can work together with China, which is something the Biden administration didn't do.
Now more than ever, Aries says the Philippines must stay vigilant and nimble when dealing with the US and its rapidly developing positions and policy.
Honestly, I don't see the US and China cooperating on anything in the short term. Um, they're just so mutually exclusive on a host of things, right? And there's so much uncommon ground between them. So countries like the Philippines need to prepare for moments like this. We can't be just caught off guard and just be, surprised that, oh no, what are we gonna do now? We need to be able to plan. So when the Trump not administration changes its mode, right? Then we have to be prepared to engage it uh, once again. In the meantime, the Marcos Jr. administration, which I think it really does a good job, is to really cultivate some of these personal relationships with the Trump 2.0 administration as much as possible, because that seemed to be the best way to get the attention of the United States.
Anything you're positive about or feeling like there might actually be a good outcome with regards to this administration?
I think for Trump 2.0, it really is disruptive, and in a way you might say really thrives on chaos. Um, Chaos is not always bad because it represents opportunities, right? Because if chaos creates crisis, crisis also creates opportunity. So we really just have to um, be able to figure out the different scenarios and contingencies and prepare for the worst. So, for example, the Philippines will chair ASEAN in 2026. The last time a US president attended an ASEAN meeting, an ASEAN related summit, was actually when Trump went to Manila in 2017, right? So this is what I call an opportunity. So in case, right, when the Philippines chairs ASEAN and hosts these summits and Trump is there, that's the opportunity that we can talk about.
Here's President Marcos again, speaking to reporters on January 30, 2025.
I will meet with President Trump because I should, because there much that we need to discuss between the U.S. and the Philippines in terms of the trade, in terms of defense and security. These are the growing pains of a new administration. But I'm sure that with time, these policies will crystallize and will become clearer. And by which time, I will have a chance to visit with President Trump. And we can discuss it with a better understanding of what the policies are.
While there are many reasons to be concerned, Aries recalls that the Philippine-US alliance has survived turbulent policy under both Trump and President Rodrigo Duterte before.
Let us remember that it was actually during the Trump 1.0 Trump administration that the alliance was able to withstand a lot of challenges. This was the first time that the United States considered the West Philippine Sea as part of the coverage of the Mutual Defense Treaty, even to the point of Duterte's unilateral abrogation, of which Trump even said, "Oh, that's fine. That means we don't have to pay." It shows you that it was able to withstand that, because I think there's something going on at the level of presidential rhetoric and policy, and there's something that is happening below that at the level of bureaucratic institutions, military to military engagement. I'm less pessimistic really about how Trump 2.0 will undermine the alliance, because it has become way more thicker and way more deeper than simply a fiat of the president can undo.
And that was today's episode of Teka Teka. I'm Bella Perez Rubio. I hope you gained as much perspective as I did from Professor Aries Arugay. We'll keep on checking in with experts like him as the Trump administration's policy unfolds. Subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts if you'd like to hear these stories as well. This episode was edited by Jen Garcia. Thanks for listening.